Okay, once we were dismissed on Friday night, the barracks changed, man. I mean, it wasn't like the dress right dress, organization, and discipline. It didn't take long for the barracks to start transforming into something reminiscent of a fraternity house after winning the big game. I mean, every door was open down the hallway. There was laughter, yelling, but most importantly, music was spilling into the hallway. I mean, you couldn't even walk 10 steps without hearing a different soundtrack. You had hip hop, thumping from one room, classic rock jamming from another, country twanging down the hall, and somebody further down was blasting heavy metal so loud that it shook the barracks, man. It was a madhouse of Lollapalooza bedlam, man. It was crazy. We would be cleaning it up all day Sunday, no doubt about that. But that was Sunday, and tonight it was time to let loose. Hello everyone, my name is Bishop Queensrÿche, and wherever you may be watching or listening, I want to take this moment to first thank you for taking the time to be here. And if this is your first time dropping by, hey, welcome. Welcome to My Life Through Music. And what this is a project that I've been working on where I talk about the songs and music that were either there at the time or they describe the thoughts, feelings, or emotions I was experiencing during these particular places and during these particular times in these stories. And the song that represents these memories is Empire by Queensrÿche, released in 1990. Before I say anything about this song, what about Jeff Tate's voice? It has got to be one of the most powerful, one of the most beautiful, one of the most melodic voices out there. And when I first heard songs by Queensrÿche, like Queen of the Rye or Take Hold of the Flame, I was speechless, period. That's all I can say. The fact that you're even here, I will assume you probably already know or have an idea of his voice. But if you haven't heard any of these songs, please go check it out. But the song Empire, I mean, what a powerful, informative song this is. In fact, it doesn't even start with music. It starts with a voicemail. And in this message, what you hear is a man unraveling in real time. His voice, it stumbles, caught between silence and words. He says something to the effect of, sorry, it's starting to hit me like a 2-ton heavy thing. And the way that comes out really tells me a lot. I mean, that's all he can manage to get out in this message. It's not pretty, it's not smooth, it's not poetic, it's broken. And in all those pauses, in those scattered you can hear the sound of helplessness. At least that's what I do. And he uses words, this image of a 2-ton, quote unquote, 2-ton heavy thing. And again, that's not flowery, it's not precise, it's almost, I guess you could say, almost childlike. But what makes it so devastating, listen, when you're being crushed by life, you don't have the luxury to pick your words. You don't have the luxury of polished words. You find yourself just reaching for whatever language you can find to describe whatever it is that is pressing down on you. I mean, his pauses, his hesitations, the way his thoughts just fall apart. To me, it is despair made audible, And one last thing, and then I'll get to the song, but sometimes the truest picture of suffering isn't from the words themselves, but it's the struggle to try and form them and get them out. I mean, have you ever been there before? I mean, I have. And that message is a man's soul trying to carry something that can no longer be carried by him. And the only thing he can get out is a 2-ton heavy thing. And then right after the voicemail, the song comes in. And in many ways, it feels like the music picks up where the voicemail leaves off. It observes, it comments, it reflects on what was happening in society at the time. I mean, the collapse, the weight, the heaviness. And I'll explain that in just a second. But the voicemail sets the stage, and the song gives it a voice. It gives it space. And so what was going on at the time? Well, okay, let's rewind the clock a little bit. First, let me just preface this by saying that, I grew up, in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, early 80s, and I was watching things like Leave It to Beaver reruns, the Brady Bunch reruns, 8 is Enough, Family Ties, Growing Pains. If you're from my generation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And those shows, along with where I was raised, the environment I was raised, gave people like me a picture of what American life was, or what it was supposed to look like. And at least it was what they wanted us to see ideally. And even if it once had been like that, like in those shows, it was quickly changing. We had seen it. Guys like me, my generation, we saw it changing right before our very eyes. So in the late 80s, early 90s, America felt like it was really shifting right under our feet. At first, and this is just my opinion, my perspective, from my view, from my experience, it was marijuana from the 60s and 70s everywhere you looked. It was being sold, it was being smoked, it was being passed around at parties, and at that time, it was very much still illegal. Things have changed over the years, but back then, it was something that you did in private, behind closed doors. You didn't want people seeing you doing this, And you know what I'm talking about. And then in the 80s, it quickly started to escalate. What had happened was cocaine, man, spilled into America. It was in the nightclubs. It was in boardrooms. It was in back alleys. No matter where you looked, it was drowning communities and soaking into every layer of society. And from there, it went to rock cocaine. And that's where, people were freebasing it in basements and in abandoned houses for days on end. And then came crack and the crystal meth epidemic, man. And this is when the bottom, really, really fell out. And it was devastating, not just people, not just families, but it was devastating entire communities. And so for many kids, especially in the inner city, all you needed to do was just do the math. It seemed quite simple, Why grind away at a job, that paid you $4 or $5 an hour for 10, 12, 14 hours a day when you could stand on a corner and people would come to you and get what you were selling, And you could do this for a couple of hours and make, 10 times as much. And hey, look, I'm not saying that it's right, but I can understand the temptation. I can understand the temptation, the allure of quick cash, the allure of quick status. Think about it. At a young age, if you had that kind of money, you could do things that other people couldn't do. You could buy cars, you could buy jewelry, and it seemed, I'll say that like this, it seemed like it was really the only way out. But that easy money, it always comes with a price. It always does. And in this case, the price usually came in the form of violence and in blood. Remember, gangs had been on the rise for years. Their gang wars were spilling onto the streets. And it was slowly starting to become headline news. Suddenly, the violence, it wasn't, it wasn't just in the big cities. It was happening on corners and neighborhoods in smaller, cities where we thought we were untouched. It was happening right in front of us. And those of us growing up at the time, we weren't reading it in history books. No, we were watching it happen and watching it unfold in real time on the nightly news. And again, rap music had been chronicling this for years, decades. And I already talked about that, in episodes past. But then out of nowhere, a progressive rock band put it in their music. And it was a little bit more rare back then for music kind of had their own lane, but it was starting to, everybody was starting to talk about it. And it wasn't just another song. To me, this was a shockwave. This was, yes, this is happening. And what it meant was that the story, the idea of what was going on in America had spread so far, the crisis had cut so deep that even genres outside the streets, like rap, they couldn't ignore it anymore. And so, if you go back to the story, I'm in the barracks, I'm in Germany, and the air was thick with cigarette smoke, man. Soldiers were drifting in and out of rooms. They had beers in their hands, or they had red, plastic cups in their hand, and they were partying like they had no care in the world. And someone had actually pulled speakers out into the corridor and made a dance floor right there in the hallway. A card game was going on in another room, video games in another room. Down the hall, guys were talking about stories from home. There was an unspoken urgency of all of this. Like we knew that the clock was ticking. And, the following week, the barracks would be empty. The lights would be out. The music turned off. The comforts that we had in the barracks would be replaced by snow, by cold, and weeks of shoot, move, and communicate. And out there would be no hot showers anymore, no warm beds, no mess hall, no Pete and Grill that you could stop on the way back from the club and get a sandwich before you go to sleep. It was just, we would have the sound of wind cutting through the trees, cold biting our faces, and the grind of training in conditions that made us question why we even signed up for this anyway. We would be waiting for the next fire mission. But that night, we didn't think about any of that. That night, we partied. And here's the thing. It wasn't just a party. It was a release, if that makes any sense. In its own way, it bonded us just as much as the discipline and the hardship did. And so I'm going down the hallways. I'm wandering. I'm soaking this in. I'm just loving it. And we're standing outside this room full of soldiers that I didn't know, I didn't recognize, and we were still learning, who these people were. We were just there, we had been there for less than 2 weeks. And so I'm standing outside this room, and I'm hearing every song that came out of this room was awesome, just epic, until finally, I hear the beginning of Rush's Tom Sawyer blasting out the door. And from there, I just went right into autopilot, man. I was drawn in, and without thinking, I started to walk in, and my buddy says, dude, where are you going, And I walked in. I'm like, dude, you coming in or not? And he just stood out there, and I looked around this room, and I felt the music, and I just started soaking it in and started grooving with everybody else. But then a few seconds later, this guy comes over to me, and he didn't ask. He yells at me. He goes, who the hell are you? And I was like, I'm kind of naive, hey, I'm Private Queensrÿche. I'm from 1st Platoon, 2nd Section. I just got here a couple weeks ago, and I'm pointing over at the, across the quad, and I'm just pointing to it. That's where where I'm from, where I live, and he goes, well, this is an FDC room, as if I knew what that meant, and I didn't, and he looked at me like he was expecting some kind of response. And so he just stared at me for a couple of, seconds, and he's like, he knew I didn't get what was going on. And he goes, "Hey, where are you from anyway?" And I told him, I was like, "Hey, I'm from Arizona." And then his eyes got really wide, and he goes, "Dude, me too." And so he's like, "Where'd you grow up?" And I told him where I grew up. And he told me that he grew up a little bit north from where I grew up in a place called Prescott or Prescott. And so he turned around, he turned the music down. He goes, "Hey, everybody, I got a homeboy here. He's from the same place I am, And he introduced me, and everybody, gave me that head nod. You're like, "Hey, what's up? Hey, how you doing?" That sort of thing. And so between all the music and all the fun and drinking that night, they told me what FDC was and what they did within the battery. And another thing that I learned was that everybody in that room was participating in this ritual. And what this ritual was that they had pushed all the furniture to the side, and they all were standing in this big circle. And what they would do was go clockwise, and everybody had a chance to go to the CD collection and pick a song. And during the entirety of that song, you were inside the circle, and you can do whatever you wanted. You could lip sync, you could play air guitar, play air drums, you could dance, you could yell, you go crazy, talk smack, whatever you wanted to do. That was your time for as long as the song went on. And so I watched and I listened and I laughed and I learned. And then that guy that I talked to, the guy that was from Arizona, he came up to me after this was going on, and he says, "All right, it's your turn." And I'm like, "My turn?" He's like, "Yeah, man. Yeah, if you're going to hang with us, this is what everybody does. It's your turn." And he pointed to the CD rack. And I was totally cool with this ritual. I was like, "Yeah, no problem, man." So I went over to the CD rack, and I looked, and I was just taking in all this music. I was checking it all out. And finally, my eyes rested on Queensrÿche's Empire. And right then, I knew exactly what song I was going to pick. And then when I turned around, after switching out the CD and pushing play, and that voicemail from that song came on in the beginning of Empire, everybody just goes, "Oh!" I want to make one more observation from this important song before I finish this episode up. In the song Empire by Queensrÿche, around 3 minutes and 21 seconds, it breaks down. And then Jeff Tate starts talking about the past years of local and state and federal spending. And they make comparisons on what was spent on things like space exploration, national defense, what was spent on law enforcement, and what he's doing. And I think he's trying to get our minds to think about what could we do to help prevent this empire if we would change these resources, if we spent our money somewhere else. And the point I'm trying to bring home here is that today, it's early March of 2026 as I made these notes and am filming this. And maybe a year ago, if you remember, it might have been a little bit longer than that, but there was some information coming out from the new administration that's in office now about where some of our money, that our nation's money was going. And we had no clue. We had no clue. And I'm not here to make an argument of where the nation's money should go. That's something different. But what I will say, what I'm going to say is that it doesn't matter if you are a nation or if you're an organization, if you're a leader of some sort, you're a manager, or even head of a household or an individual. You need to know where your money is going. You need to know where your money is going. That's the first step. And again, I'm getting off course, and I might touch on this a little bit further down the road, and I'll just leave it at that. But you got to know where your money is going. And these are the reasons why I need to thank the mighty Queensrÿche for this awesome song and the memories that it brings. Go check it out, man, whenever you have time, however you access your music today, and I think you'll know what I'm trying to say here. And so that night, I went to bed after everything calmed down, and I was reflecting, and I guess you could say I had a drunk mind, but yet still a sober heart. Because, I was lying there, and I was thinking about the people that I had met over the past week or so. And I had friends. I had people I could lean on. I had acquaintances. But still, I felt like there was something missing. I was actually looking for somebody who could be more than just another dude to party with, another, something more than just to get drunk with. I wanted, this might sound weird, corny, but I wanted someone I could experience these next 2 years with. I wanted someone that I could experience this country with, the people of this country with, a real friend, a true brother, that I can get into really deep conversations and talk about, deep concepts and stuff, and I wanted somebody that would want to be getting the same experience that I was getting. And you could say that it was almost a prayer. No, not almost a prayer. It really was a prayer. And as the saying goes, God works in mysterious ways, because I didn't realize it then, but a true friend was already on his way. And I'll be talking about that and a little more the next time I talk about my life through music. As always, thank you very much. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Oh, there we go. We got sound. We got sound. It was a madhouse of Lollapaloozic bedlam. Yeah. Say that 3 times fast. Hello, everyone. My name is Bishop Queensrÿche, and wherever... Before... Oops. Yeah, because when you're being crushed, when you're being crushed by life, and finally he said, dude, where are you from? And I told him where I was from, and he told me that he was from Prescott. Say Prescott. Make sure you reference, don't say just Prescott, say Prescott too. Make sure you know where your money is going.